For me, this is very unusual, being here on a sunny day. Yes, every time we've got umbrellas, and the idea that it's bright and sunny in this place is new. So, okay, let's wait for a few more people to come up. Any questions on what we covered before the break, Mike?
I have a question. With regard to Piti and Sukha, can you talk about the differences between them? I'd always, and you've actually practiced on this before, but I'd always thought that Piti was mental joy and Sukha was a feeling of pleasure throughout the body.
No, the word Piti, the one we translate as rapture, refreshment, it can be both physical and mental, and the Sukha, the pleasure, can also be physical and mental. The rapture has more to do with some kind of being energizing. They talk more often about how it's something that gives you energy. And in fact, for some people, it can actually be very unpleasant. For people who have had an experience of almost drowning, the sense of fullness will trigger reactions as to when they almost drowned. So it's not always pleasant, but it's kind of an energy.
To the extent that I've been able to cultivate either, I've been thinking about the idea of sort of taking out the Piti and moving more towards.
Okay, well, the Piti can be useful when you feel a need for the energy.
Yeah.
And then you want to get past it. You say, well, this is enough. I don't need to keep playing with this all the time. I knew an old nun in Thailand who, for her, when she started getting the Piti, she'd start rocking back and forth like this. And at the end of the meditation, she'd say, see, did you see me walking back and forth? As if that were a major accomplishment. So okay, it's nice that you're getting high off of this, but hey, now you've got to settle down. Any other questions? Yes.
In meditation, when our intention is to put down or let go of all fabrications, I'm assuming this leads to no view of self. And if that's the case, if you are protecting yourself, then you are strengthening your view of self.
Well, you need to have a good, solid, healthy sense of self before you start putting it down. And the Buddha talks about this in the sense of having a sense of self as, what he calls the self as your governing principle, and actually Venerable Ananda talks about this quite a lot, that you need also have what they call a sense of conceit. In other words, other people can do this, they're human beings, I'm a human being, I should be able to do this too. That is a necessary prerequisite for the path. And if the self as a governing principle is when you feel, I entered on this path because I want to find happiness. If I think of abandoning it, then do I really love myself? I should love myself. So the Buddha never said there is no self. When the question was put to him point blank, is there a self, is there no self, he refused to answer. And another point, he actually said, these questions are not worth paying attention to. The question is, where is our suffering? What activities are giving rise to the suffering? Let's put them down. But he also does talk about having the self as its own mainstay, learning how to make yourself reliable, and having a sense of learning how to protect what you've got. That's part of right effort. I mean, you don't let go of these things until you don't need them. So as long as you need them, don't say, I've got to let go of myself so to be rid of it. No, I've actually got to develop this and protect it. You'll find, though, that your sense of self is many senses of selves. Think about the committee of the mind. There's lots of yous in there. If you looked at the picture of each of these yous, it would be you, maybe at different ages, in different emotional states, but it'd be all you in there. And so you have to start sorting out among them which are the ones I'm going to side with, which are the ones I'm going to learn how to let go. So don't worry about having a self. You need it.
Just do the breathing.
Do the breathing and do what's skillful. And if there's a skillful sense of self that you need to rely on, okay, rely on that as long as you need it. Because why do we have a sense of self? It's because we want happiness. And the sense of self, again, it gets who's going to enjoy this and who's going to be able to do this. You need that in order to practice. It's only when you don't need that anymore, i.e. you've found the ultimate happiness, which is nothing that requires that you have to maintain it or protect it or do anything more to have it. That's when you can let that sense of self go. And you realize all along the sense of self was a strategy. In the same way that the teaching on not self is a strategy for figuring out where am I attached to something that I should not be attached to. Maybe I can let go of that particular sense of self.
And along with that, are we constantly questioning who?
No, you don't have to. Just work on what's the skillful thing to do with this particular voice in the mind. Anything else?
Not to be too precise, I still don't understand the difference between the two.
Piti and sukha.
Yeah.
It's the piti, as I said, is a strong sense of energy, which can be pleasant or unpleasant, whereas sukha, pleasure, it feels really good, it feels very easeful. And so that's more calming, which is why as you go through the states of concentration, you go from one that has both the energy and the sukha, and then to a more calm state where things calm down. Okay, we're going to talk about pain under the second tetrad. The first two steps in dealing with pain have to do with those first two steps in being sensitive to pleasure and sensitive to rapture. So you've got a pain in your knee. The first thing is not to focus on the knee. Focus on some spot in the body that you can make pleasurable through the way you breathe. That's your first line of defense. So the mind has a place in the body where it feels, okay, I can be okay here. Maybe let the pain have the knee for the time being, but I'm going to be, say, around my heart. I'm going to be someplace else in the body. And then once that sense of well-being gets solid enough, you can think of it spreading through the different parts of the body and through the pain. Because oftentimes one of the problems with the pain is that you've been tensing up around it. It may actually happen that the original cause of the pain is gone, but the tension is still there. And if you can release the tension, you realize, the pain's gone. That's one thing. Sometimes, however, the pain will still be there, but releasing your tension around it allows you to then feel not quite so threatened by it. And then you're ready for the next step, which is looking into what are the mental fabrications that I'm doing around the pain, i.e., what are the perceptions I'm holding here that are making the pain a problem for the mind. Because we have this assumption that as soon as there's a pain in the body, it has to cause suffering in the mind, and that's the question. That's the assumption. We have to question: why does it have to spread from the body into the mind? What's the bridge between the two? And the bridge is your perceptions, how you're holding, what perceptions, what images you have in mind. Based on the images, then of course there's the verbal fabrication, is how am I talking to myself about the pain, which is making things worse. And I cut through that. So at that point you're not so much trying to change the pain as you're looking at what is the relationship of the mind to the pain in the way that it's perceiving, labeling, commenting on it. And Ajahn Mahabua has some interesting ways of dealing with it. You start asking questions about the pain, and some of the questions are really strange. Is the pain the same thing as, say, the knee? And logically you would say, no, the pain is one thing, the knee is something else. But there may be something deep down inside of your mind that says that it's the pain has totally permeated the knee, and they're the same thing now. So you have to let's undo that perception. Because what you've got in the body are the four elements, i.e. the qualities of solidity, liquidity, warmth, and breath energy. Now, the pain is none of those. It's right there, they're right there together, but again, it's like different frequencies. The pain is one thing, the body is something else. Can you hold that perception in mind to see that they are something separate? Another thing you might ask yourself, is the pain a solid block? What's the shape of the pain? What's the color of the pain? And you realize, wait a minute, there should be no shape, there should be no color. Pain is shapeless. Then and is it solid, or is it just little dots and dots and dots of pain sensation appearing and disappearing? When you can see it as little dots of sensation, then you can ask yourself, well, where is the most intense of those dots? And as you chase the most intense dot down, you find that you can't catch up with it. It moves around. So this makes the pain a lot more fluid than it was before. And then you can ask yourself, these little dots of pain, are they coming at me or are they going away? Because a lot of it has to do with this is coming out of my mind. You might even have the perception someplace buried deep down inside that the pain actually has an intention, is trying to hurt me. You only have to question that. I mean, a lot of these perceptions we actually picked up way before we knew language, or way before we could think properly. Because we were dealing with pain since birth, but we didn't have any language, we didn't have any ways of getting a good perspective on it, so we carried over even from those early days some strange ideas about pain. So you've got to question it. Does the pain want to hurt me? No. The pain's just there. And this one about the pain coming at you or going away, I found this very helpful one time. I was at a Chinese physician in Singapore, and he was working on my back, and I didn't realize what he was going to do to my back. Otherwise, I don't think I would have. I mean, I felt much better after the treatment was over, but the treatment was awful. He started rubbing this oil into my back, and at first it felt nice. Then they started rubbing more and more and more friction and more. The skin was getting a little raw, and then he pulled out these bamboo whisks, where he'd taken two little pieces of bamboo, and it sliced them very, 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 very thin, so they're little whisks. And they sort of up and down my back. And it went on for about 20 minutes. And I kept thinking, the first thing is, okay, what did I do in the past lifetime that I deserve this? And I said, it's obvious he's not going to stop, so I've got to figure out some way of relating to the pain. And then I remember this thing about the pain coming at you versus the pain going away. And it was just thinking like you're sitting in the back of a station wagon, those old station wagons where the back seat faced back. And as you're going down the road, everything you see, as soon as it comes into your range of vision, is actually going away. So it's held that perception in mind, and it made a huge difference as to how I related to the pain. So you'll see that the problem of why the pain comes into the mind is the perception. And you want to get to these perceptions by asking some unusual questions like, what is the shape of the pain? What is the intention of the pain? What is the direction of the pain? And kind of undo any unskillful things that are making it seem like the pain has to infiltrate from the body into the mind. So that's called calming mental fabrication. This is how these steps in the second tetrad are very helpful for dealing not only with the pleasure that comes up in meditation, but also pains that you have in daily life. And in this way, you become less and less and less afraid of pain. And when you're less afraid of pain, you can rely on your mind a lot more. To know that, okay, if things get difficult, I don't have to be afraid of pain because I know how to deal with it. If it's everybody, what the therapist was telling us yesterday, that all these dreams come true, there's going to be a nuclear attack, the bugs are going to take over the world, or whatever. I don't have to be afraid of pain. I don't have to be afraid of that. I can rely on myself more, because this is one of the big fears I have. Is in America we're very, very soft. And we're expecting things to go really, really well, and then when things don't go well, people who have had it really soft tend to just go berserk. Whereas if you're used to dealing with difficulties, you say, okay, I can handle this, and I can still maintain my virtue, and I can still maintain my good qualities in the face of difficulties. I think we'd be able to handle things a lot better. So learning how to deal with pleasure and pain so you're not overcome by them is one of the important skills that we learn as meditators. Margaret?
Sometimes emotional pain can really take over.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the techniques that you spoke of, some of the tools that you spoke of could be helpful, but in adapting with the emotional.
Right, that's when we go into the third tetrad. That's under the next. Okay. Mm-hmm. Any other things on pain, pleasure, pain, the second tetrad before we move on? Yes?
Is there a problem if your mind is not able to perceive pleasure and the sensation that you receive are either neutral or neutral?
There's no pleasure at all?
Categorizes all sensations are either just sensations or just...
Okay. The thing is, the mind is going to have someplace to go to gain a sense of well-being. Where do you go for your sense of well-being? No thoughts at all? Mm-hmm.
As you say, the breath just moving through the body. But the mind doesn't recognize that as rapture or pleasant. It just recognizes that as just a sensation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily.
Okay, then the question is, where does your mind go for pleasure?
That's my problem. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know how to register what's next.
Where does it go for mental pleasure?
Probably unskillful thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's then the problem. I mean, if you can find some physical pleasure, learn how to cultivate a sense that, this feels good. And it's going to start out feeling somewhat neutral, but you say, let me protect that neutral feeling, so that I'm not squeezing it or putting any pressure on it, and just allow it to kind of be there for a while. And see if you can help maintain that. And then it may be able to develop into something that's more pleasurable. Because if you're just taught to just whatever comes up, just let it go, let it go, let it go, it's never going to have a chance to develop. And if you're afraid of developing it, then, as I said, your mind will go to unskillful things for its pleasures. So it's good not to be afraid of... I mean, this is what the Buddha was dealing with after the end of his austerities. He'd been running away from physical pleasure and denying it. And then he realized that it was a dead end. And so he had to focus back on developing the pleasure. But the first thing he had to ask himself, why am I afraid of that pleasure? And he realized, okay, this pleasure is blameless. It's not harming anybody. And it is a sense of clarity. There's a sense of clarity that goes with that, and you want to learn how to protect that. There's no need to be afraid of it. So allow yourself to be with something long enough so that can move from neutral into pleasant. Give that a try. Okay, third tetrad. When you are sensitive to the mind, sensitive to how to gladden the mind, steady the mind, or release the mind. So here you're trying to observe your meditation to learn the lessons, what you learned about what works in getting the mind where you want it to be. And this is going to involve, as I was seeing, if the mind is feeling low, depressed, sluggish, first step then is to what do you do to gladden the mind. Now in some cases certain ways of breathing will gladden the mind because they're more energizing. Other times you have to drop the breath for the time being and pick up other topics. For example, classically they talk about contemplation of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha as things that will gladden the mind. You think about who the Buddha was, what kind of person he was, what kind of qualities he had. I mean, somebody who was wealthy, powerful, had everything, and just gave it all up and went off into the forest. It's kind of like imagining, Michael Jackson, saying, "Okay, enough of this, I'm going off." Or Prince Charles, "This is stupid British royalty, I'm out of here." We very rarely see people like that. And then when they do come back, they go on a book tour and they sell their books. Whereas the Buddha did none of that. And he went off and he came back, and everything he taught, we taught for free. He continued accepting alms for the whole of the rest of his life. Walked around India. And compassion for everybody, from people the lowest levels to the highest levels. That was the kind of person he was. So you find that gladdening and encouraging, you think about that. Think about the Dharma that he taught, how harmless it is to practice the Dharma, how beneficial it is. Think about the Sangha. Sometimes the Buddha is a little bit too superhuman to think about. You think about the members of the Sangha who are ordinary people like us, and yet they were able to overcome many times, suicidal issues and everything, but they were able to get around that and finally make their way to awakening. That can give you some energy. If you start having doubts about yourself, am I capable of doing this? Then you think about your generosity, you think about your virtue. And there's an interesting one that's called recollection of the devas, i.e. recollecting that the qualities that make a person into a deva are things that you have. You can use any of those contemplations. Particularly with generosity. If you can only think of one time in your life when you've been generous, you can milk it for only so many times in your meditation. So it's good to make generosity a regular practice, The same with virtue. There's one time that you were virtuous, and now it has to become a steady part of your practice. And then you can fall back on that to gladden the mind. Another way of gladdening the mind is to develop thoughts of goodwill, which is why every meditation begins with thoughts of goodwill for everybody. You realize that as you're meditating, you're doing something that's totally harmless. You're looking for happiness in a way that doesn't place any burdens on anybody, which is a good thing. And then the fact that you can extend thoughts of goodwill even to difficult people, you find that uplifting for yourself. It gives you more energy. You can think about, there's certain people you really would like to see suffer a little bit before they could understand the causes of true happiness and be able to act on them. You say, wait a minute, no, I don't need to see them squirm. I'd be perfectly happy if so-and-so suddenly changed his or her ways, and then you can feel better about yourself. These are ways of gladdening the mind. We talked a little bit about goodwill last night. Some of you weren't here, so I'd like to go over some of the issues. I prefer the translation goodwill to loving kindness. This is the word metta in Pali, because it's the attitude that you don't have to like the person in order to have goodwill for them. You can still recognize, okay, this person is a real, whatever you want to say. But then I don't need to see that person suffer in order for me to be happy. I'll be happy to see him change his or her change his or her ways. So that's basically goodwill rather than loving kindness. There is that passage that's sometimes translated that just as a mother would cherish her child, you should cherish all living beings. The passage doesn't say that. It says you should cherish your goodwill the same way that a mother protects her child. So in other words, even in difficult situations, you maintain your goodwill regardless, which is something that's a lot more doable. You have to understand, when you say wish for true happiness, you have to understand in line with the principles of karma. The goodwill itself is something you have to do. It's not in the innate quality of your mind. It's just as easy for you to have goodwill as it is for you to have ill will. I mean, the two are equally possible. And for most of us, we come into life not with goodwill for everybody, but with goodwill for certain people. There are other people it's not so easy. So you have to make up your mind. This is something I'm going to try to consciously develop. It's learning to have goodwill for everybody. And this is why the Buddha talks about it as a determination. In other words, you have to make up your mind you're going to do this. And then it's a form of mindfulness is to remember that. So that when you're sitting here spreading thoughts of goodwill and then you leave the meditation and you go out on the road and somebody does something stupid on the road, you don't lose your goodwill. It doesn't jump out the window. You try to remember this in all situations. Okay. Secondly, you remember you're doing this for your own sake. It's not the question of whether somebody deserves your goodwill or doesn't deserve your goodwill. Put that thought aside. It's you, in order to trust yourself in difficult situations, need to be able to develop goodwill for everybody. so that you will not be creating bad karma in difficult situations. And remember, what you're wishing for is, may they understand the causes for happiness and be able to act on them. And the Buddha's phrases for goodwill are things like this: may these beings look after themselves with ease. In other words, you're not saying, may I be there for them, may they be there for themselves. That's what you're saying. Here's another one: let no one deceive another or despise anyone anywhere, or through anger or resistance wish for another to suffer. In other words, may they have the causes for happiness in their activities. That's what you're wishing for. So those are some of the ways in which you can gladden the mind. In other words, there are times when you can work with the breath and have fun with the breath, and that will energize the mind and gladden the mind. Other times that's not working. You have to put the breath aside for the time being and move to something else that you find more gladdening. Now, with steadying the mind, again, you can work with the breath to make the mind more steady. I find that thinking of the breath filling the whole body all at once, kind of like just really solid breath, and that helps get the mind to settle down. Other times that doesn't work, and this is where the Buddha recommend contemplation of death. Your mind is all over the place. You say, my gosh, if I died in the middle of this, wouldn't it be embarrassing? Is this the way I want to leave the human life, is thinking about the stupid stuff that I'm thinking about? And also say, remind yourself, okay, I don't know when I am going to die, so this might be my last day. The Buddha has you think every day when the sun rises, this might be my last day. Am I ready to go? If not, what do I need to do in order to get my mind ready to go? And then again at sunset, remind yourself, this could be my last sunset. Am I ready to go tonight? If not, okay, what work do I do tonight? That kind of focuses you. So the mind can begin to settle down. And as I've said a couple times already, the part of the mind that says, I've got to worry about this, worry about that, you say, look, the future is uncertain, but you do know that you will need mindfulness and alertness to deal with the unexpected. So by focusing back in on the present moment, you're not being irresponsible, you're developing the qualities you're going to need. For releasing the mind, and this is when you start dealing with difficult emotions coming up. The Buddha basically has 5 steps. One is you want to see when this particular issue comes up, when does it come up? And when it comes up, what's causing it? What's sparking it? Now you might say, well, so-and-so did this to me, and I'm really upset by what so-and-so did to me. But the question is, well, why am I feeding off of what so-and-so did to me? It may not be what so-and-so did. It may be that I like to feel oppressed. I can squeeze some things out of my victimhood. Is that what's it operating at that particular point? You might want to look into that. I mean, there's no stronger sense of self than the self that's been wronged. And sometimes you really like to hold on to that. So look for that. And other times when you're upset and you start thinking about, boy, we'd really like to get back at that person. It's like that New Yorker cartoon where the 2 witches are over a big cauldron. And one of them is saying, it's too sweet, you put in too much revenge. So you can ask yourself, is that what's sparking you to keep coming back and back and back at that thought? And then when it passes away, okay, what left in the mind when that thought passed away? Last night we talked about that, the sense we have that this emotional pain is sustained. But to what extent does it arise and then it falls away and then you stir it up again? So we're going to look for times when you've actually forgotten about it. And you say, oh, it's there, and then you bring it back up. There's a back and forth that's going there. And this is where you begin to see, okay, I'm actually fabricating this, which is one of the reasons I use the word fabrication. I'm bringing it back up, bringing it back up. And that's when you want to look into, why do I like this? Even though it's an emotional pain, there's something about the mind that likes the emotional pain, it keeps going back. You have to watch out for that. And because we tend to hide that from ourselves, it's going to require a lot of looking. Again and again and again. What do I like about this? And then you can compare it with the drawbacks. So, what is this doing to me as I continue to feed off of this pain? And then you can let it go. When you begin to see that the drawbacks far outweigh whatever gratification you're getting out of it. Margaret?
Yeah, it's a real opportunity to recognize what your tendencies are, what your inclinations are, and how certain beliefs are based on that as well. They can really take hold. And, thinking about something that I was holding on to just recently, how real that was, and how ridiculous it feels right now.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating.
Well, then reflect on that.
Right.
So the next time you pull it up against it, wait a minute, in 5 days this is going to seem so ridiculous. And part of the mind will say, well, in that case, I want to get as much pleasure out of it as it can right now. And so I have to deal with that. But you'll have to, it's like dealing with little kids, you have to figure them out, And of course, they will do everything they can.
Well, and I like some of the techniques that the monastics use in physical work as well, because that can allow certain insights to come up if you're sweeping or you're...
Right. You have to clean your house, That cleans up a lot of stuff in your own mind. I think this is one of the reasons why. I remember when Ajaan Geoff started telling me stories about how very precise Ajahn Mun was about cleaning things. My first reaction was anal retentive. But then as I started living the life, I began to realize this is my sanity. Just keeping things really, really neat, really, really clean. And if part of me is resisting, and I say, okay, why? And you see things coming up.
Yeah, you find that little can hide
Okay. Okay, when the Buddha talks about releasing the mind, in the beginning it's releasing it from really unskillful states, like that. And then further on, as you're going through the levels of concentration, you're actually releasing it from a lower level of concentration as you get into a higher level of concentration. That too counts as release. And then, of course, there's the ultimate release when you've gotten to the point where the path ends. It's delivered you, and you can put the path aside. So this last step actually covers many levels of letting go. But the main process he always gives is that 5-step. Watch it for the origination, watch for the passing away, watch for the allure, why do you like it, watch for the drawbacks, and then be able comparing the drawbacks and the allure to finally get to the point of dispassion, which actually releases you from that. There was a hand back here? Yeah.
Yes, so I'm in a kind of a hostile work situation right now, and I find that there's a lot of fear, and so I find that I ruminate about that, and I kind of ask the question, what do I like about that rumination? And it's because I'm always trying to project a different future. And, that's what I like about it. I want something secure in the future instead of all this fear.
And the insecurity. Well, part of it is you say, if I'm sitting there trying to... It's like those old days, remember when Kennedy was assassinated and they kept playing that tape over and over and over again, and each time they played it they think, maybe they won't shoot him this time. It's crazy. And you say, okay, the work situation is always going to be insecure. And the next question is, okay, given the fact that it's insecure, how do I learn how to live with the insecurity without it's eating me up?
Which comes back to the concentration.
One, it comes back to the concentration, and two, at the end of the concentration, you might say, okay, now that my mind is better concentrated, let me pose that question in the mind. Suppose I did lose my job. What would I do? And start making concrete plans. So that's not this horrible, total unknown, You can come here and offer to, be a janitor for the Portland's Friends of the Dharma. Yeah, but hey.
And you don't provide insurance, right?
No. You'd spare a little food, right? This is the problem with lay Dharma centers as opposed to monasteries. I mean, the monasteries usually always have a little extra food left over for people who come by, and then we're kind of hard up. So yeah, but there are sometimes problems in the future you do have to think about, and tell yourself, okay, I will practice my concentration today, and then at the last 10 minutes of my concentration period, I will allow myself to think about this. And ask yourself, okay, rather than wanting to make it secure, the question is, okay, given that it's insecure, what are my alternatives if what I think of the worst possible thing could happen? And as you begin to realize, okay, there are alternatives, you fear it less. And it's not as so all-consuming. Anything else? Yes.
You were mentioning mindfulness of death earlier, and it makes me think of the sutta where the Buddha, where one monk says, I practice mindfulness of death
once a day, yeah.
Versus all the way to one more slowly breathing in and out. And I've always kind of wondered what he's getting at there, and is it just the sense of the strength of the death contemplation to be able to pull you out of whatever?
Exactly. You find yourself in an unskillful thought. You say, wait a minute, I've got this moment. I know I have this moment to practice. I don't know if I'm going to have any moments after that. So I can't throw this moment away. Because when the Buddha is talking about being in the present moment, it's never because it's a wonderful present moment, or it's the only place you're going to be, or present awareness is unconditioned awareness, none of that stuff. It's always, there's duties to be done, and now is the time to do it. Because who knows how quickly something could come. A little blood clot might start getting the wanderlust in your body and start wandering around, in your heart, and that's it, And it doesn't give you any warning. You don't feel it until,
So it's sort of developing that perception of the executioner behind you.
Right. You got to be really heedful right now. And then the next question, what can I do right now? If I can get my mind focused, or if my mind is wandering off in something that's unskillful, hey, I just got to drop that. I can't follow that. I know where that's going to take me anyhow, and why do I have to follow it again? Yes?
I have a question about anger and aversion, and it seems like it's different in the strong emotions in some ways because it can take so many different forms. And I think, for people that have a history of trauma too, and have been, that goes way back, and you're, and you might not even have a sense of victimhood, but you present as a victim because you're always thinking of how am I going to survive, or how am I going to, get people not to be violent to me or something, so it's a sense of sometimes it almost seems beneficial to develop a certain amount of acknowledging anger, seeing where it sits or how it sits in your body. But that seems like it takes some amount of investigation, and I think people like that can sometimes have a real hard time with, how much to let go of. Just have an antidote, just practice loving kindness.
Well, you've got to, if you're going to go into something like that, it's pretty similar to going into a physical pain, in the sense that you have to have a good place to stand first, which is what the concentration provides. A sense, okay, I've got a center here that I can trust and I can feel comfortable in, and learning how to retreat to that center whenever you need to. And when you have that ability, then you can say, let's go into that anger and try to figure it out. Again, what's the allure of the anger? Why do I keep going back to that? And instead of thinking about what happened in the past, what do I find in the anger right now? That means, or my reaction right now. And if you find that it's beginning to pull you in, go back. Say, I'm not ready for this yet. And be willing to live with the fact that this is an unsettled question for the time being, but you are gathering your strength so that you can be in a position where you can go into it at some point. Because loving kindness on its own is not going to cut it, because it's as you said, it's a complicated thing with many layers, and you're going to have to be taking it apart layer by layer, and it's going to be kind of a back and forth, getting the mind still and probing a little bit, and then whoops, coming back, probing a little bit, maybe getting a little bit more understanding, and then coming back. And think of it, this is going to be a long-term process. But whatever little you can do to chip away each time is all to the good. But it's always good first to have that place where you can retreat to, so that when it gets overwhelming, you can, whoops, I have to pull back now. And don't beat yourself up over the fact that I'm not making any progress with this yet, or I'm not being as assertive as I should be. This is going to be it's going to take time, and to be patient with that. It's kind of like learning how to fight. I took lessons in Thai boxing when I was a layperson in Thailand. And the very first thing they teach you is how to pull out. So that when your opponent is basically too much for you, how do you pull out without exposing yourself to your opponent? And in the same way with this, you've got to have a good safe place to stay. And then you come from that safe place, okay, now I can start probing into this. So that when you are basically what they call being with the anger, you're not in a position where you're going to be totally overwhelmed. So, whoops, I've got to pull out and just got to get calm until I'm ready to go back. So, this whole business of releasing, this is where the question of dealing with the hindrances comes in. Because the first thing you have to recognize is this is a hindrance. For most of us, this is not the first thing that comes to mind. You're angry about somebody, the first thing that comes to your mind is, boy, that person really is really horrible, You're not thinking back on yourself, hey, wait a minute, I'm engaging in a hindrance. Or when lust comes up, or when sleepiness comes up, or worry comes up, that's not the first thought, oh, this is a hindrance. Lust comes up, let's go, Greed comes up, let's go, It's when you really realize, oh, this is actually a problem for my mind, I've got to do something about this. That's a first and very major step to recognize, okay, this is a problem. Then once you realize it's a problem, then you figure out, okay, what are the antidotes to this? Because once you're on the side of, I've got to get out of this, that changes the dynamic of power. Because if you go through the method, if you really enjoy your anger and you sit there, oh, I got to think thoughts of goodwill. Okay, I think thoughts of goodwill to that bastard, and it just doesn't. It's not going to win. You got to really see. I got to get out of this. This is why seeing the drawbacks is important. Okay, then you say, okay, now I've got to deal with the fact that I'm harming myself with my anger. I better do something about that first. If I really loved myself, that's where the goodwill starts. If I really loved myself, I would not be wallowing in this. It's like a dog that has dragged in something he dug up, And why am I wallowing in this? And then you can deal with the various antidotes. The antidote for lust, of course, is contemplation of the parts of the body. You take the body apart mentally and think of putting all the parts on the floor. You start with your own body first. You think, like, so anything in there that is really worthy of lust? No, I can't do that. And then you realize, well, the other person has just the same sort of parts, What is there worthy of? This contemplation is good not only for lust, but also for racism. You take your skin off, you take the other person's skin off. There's not skin on the floor, So why should I be concerned about the other person's skin? Why should I think that my skin is better than their skin? It's all kind of the same stuff. So, dealing with ill will, of course, the antidote is goodwill. Sometimes, though, the Buddha says you have to just develop equanimity. It's okay, this is something, I can't really feel goodwill for this person, but I've got to have equanimity for the situation, that this is just the way it is. And what actually starts out, even before you get that far, if you can't muster even that much, the Buddha says, well, remind yourself that if I let myself get angry at this person, I will probably do a lot of stupid things. And that would give pleasure to my enemy. Do I want to give pleasure to that bastard? This is using a not quite skillful mental state to undercut a more unskillful mental state. I mean, the Buddha is very realistic about this. Sometimes you have to do something that's not quite skillful, but at least to get you out of something worse. So he said, no, I'm not going to give this person the pleasure of seeing me do something stupid. So I've got to control it. And that's when you start thinking about goodwill for yourself, goodwill ultimately for the other person. Or as the Buddha said, if you can't think of anything good in that other person, you've got to have compassion, because they're just digging a big hole for themselves. Now, just remind yourself, okay, their karma is their karma, my karma is my karma. I don't have to let their karma get me worked up. And I especially don't want their bad karma to cause me to do something bad. That's another way of applying goodwill, which may not, it's not listed in the goodwill phrases, but it's goodwill for yourself. Okay. Sleepiness, the traditional thing is you find yourself meditating and you're falling asleep, change the object of your meditation, number one. Especially if the breath is getting really calm and really still and very pleasant and very weak and you drift off. Okay, you've got to strengthen the breath or move to something that requires more mental activity. Like the contemplation of, where are my bones right now? The other things are, if you've memorized something, either repeat it to yourself or repeat it out loud. Get up, walk around. In other words, test the sleepiness. And the reason you do this is sometimes either you're bored or something is going to come up in the mind that you don't want to look at, and the mind has this way of putting itself to sleep when that's going to happen. Some part of you knows that something is going to come up that you don't want to see. And so you've got to test it. You've got to get past that. Otherwise, you will never let yourself see that thing, whatever it is. So you've got to test it. If, however, after testing it by doing walking meditation, you're still falling asleep, Ajaan Geoff has that great recommendation. He says, okay, now try walking backwards. And if that still doesn't wake you up, you got to go to sleep. The mind really does need to sleep. But you've got to test it first. And then even when you go to bed, you remind yourself, as soon as I wake up, I'm going to get up. I'm not just going to turn over and wallow some more in the pleasure of lying down. So those are ways of dealing with some of the hindrances. Any more questions on that third tetrad? We're dealing with the mind. Yeah.
What about the hindrance of doubt?
Hindrance of doubt. Look, when you breathe in, you say, at least I know I am breathing in, right? I can doubt lots of other things, but I know I'm with my breath. Now, part of the mind, if you can either be doubt about the practice or doubt about yourself. And this is where those contemplations about thinking about what a good practice this is can, give rise to a sense of conviction. Or looking at your own goodness can give rise to a sense of conviction. Okay, I can handle this. I can do this. Those are the traditional ways of dealing with it. And then the Buddha says, if you just look at what you're doing and say, okay, when I do this, what are the results? When I do that, what are the results? Then you begin to be able to gain this distinction between what's skillful and what's not skillful. Because for the Buddha, that's the big issue that you want to resolve doubt about, is what is skillful and what is not skillful. And sometimes the only way you can do that is, okay, I'm going to try this. and learn from it. Because if you're not even willing to try something that's potentially skillful, then there's no hope for you. In other words, you used to say, I'm just going to live with my doubt because no, there's nothing out there is really certain, so I might as well just, not try. That's laziness. The only way you're going to learn any certainty in life is I'm just going to try committing myself to something for a while and see what the results are. Okay, the fourth tetrad, which is training yourself to breathe in and out, focused on inconstancy, focused on dispassion, focused on cessation, focused on relinquishment. This relates to those steps I told you about when you're trying to overcome something unskillful, release the mind from something unskillful. You see the origination and the passing away. That's the inconstancy. Now, based on that perception of seeing how this is inconstant, then the next question is it easeful or is it stressful? It's stressful. And if something is inconstant and stressful, why do I hold on? That's basically what the teaching on not self is about. It's a value judgment. Is this worth holding on to me or mine? And this gets back to the point made at the very beginning of the afternoon, that the Buddha says we are fabricating our experience because we think we're going to get something out of it. There's an element of anticipation in there. I'm going to get some pleasure out of manipulating it this way and manipulating it that way. And you begin to see that no matter how well I manipulate it, there's still going to be something lacking. Maybe I should let go. But you don't let go beforehand. If you say, well, since the whole point of the practice is to let go, why don't you just let go from the beginning? It's not going to deliver you to where you should go. You have to go through the process step by step by step, and it will deliver you to a place where when letting go actually takes you to a better place, rather than just back to where you were. So you try to develop dispassion by contemplating inconstancy, stress, not self, in whatever ways you can think about why you do not want to hold on to this. When you develop dispassion for it, then the impetus to keep fabricating that particular issue falls away, because it's through your passion for this anticipation that keeps you going at the process. When there's dispassion, then there's what they call cessation, which is the ceasing of that fabrication. And then once the whole issue is done, then you can put everything aside. Now this dynamic is followed, as I said, dealing with just plain old unskillful mental states, dealing with trying to move from one state of concentration to a deeper state of concentration. Like when you're working with the breath, and you're adjusting it and then trying to get it really well, you finally get to a point where you realize, okay, no matter how well you adjust it, this is as far as it's going to go. And so why are you still talking to yourself about it? Can't you just be with it? Wouldn't it be easier just to settle down into the breath and just be there? Now you don't let this go until you've gotten to yourself as well as, you've done the breath as well as you can, then you let that go. And you say, okay, now I can let go of that chatter in my mind because I don't need it right now. So that's the second level of letting go. And then finally the third level of letting go, as I said earlier, is when the path is taking you all the way and you can put that aside. Then you're done with it. Let's see what I have here. Any questions on the 16 steps of breath meditation before we move on to talk a little bit about concentration? Yes?
Before the break, you mentioned
Samatha. Okay, well, in the Buddha's definition of samatha, that's basically what you can do to get the mind to calm, to get settled down, settle in. And vipassana, or insight, is the process of looking into fabrication, the process of fabrication in the mind, how it should be perceived, how it should be understood, how you can learn how to let it go. That's insight. Now, in the 16 steps of breath meditation, the Buddha is putting those two together. You're doing the two at the same time. In other words, you learn to see the process of fabrication and you learn how to calm it down. In other words, what is the impact that this fabrication is having on, whether it's bodily fabrication, i.e. the breath, verbal fabrication, the mind's chatter into itself, or mental fabrication, your perceptions. So what perceptions, say, would be calmer or have a more calming effect? What kind of breathing would have a more calming effect? When I talk to myself, what kind of discussion inside the mind will have a more calming effect? So that's the insight part. As you see that, okay, I am actually fabricating these things. And you're trying to figure out what would have a better and better and better impact on the mind. And then the insight, as it gets deeper and deeper and gets more and more subtle, you find yourself peeling up layers of stuff inside that you didn't see before. Okay, we have 25 minutes for Jhana. Okay, I'll give you a brief discussion here. Okay, oops, I missed my... Oh, here we go. Okay, one of the results of breath meditation is it leads to jhana. The word jhana itself relates to the verb jayati, which means to burn with a steady flame. The Pali language has many different words for burning, and the word that they use for an oil lamp is jayati. And it has a steady flame, steady enough that you can read by. And this mind of ours, which is like a wood fire, the flame is sticking out all over the place. We're trying to change the way it burns, basically. So you're focused on one object, and there's a steadiness to it. And because it's so steady, you can read your mind as it's going into this state of concentration. One of the definitions of the word concentration is egakata, which has been translated many times, sometimes as singleness of mind or one-pointedness of mind. The translation one-pointedness comes from taking the word apart. Eka, which means one. Aga, which they say means point. It's not quite point, though. We'll get back to that in a minute. And then the da at the end is like ness, one-pointedness. So the important part is this word aga here. The word aga can mean a tip of something. It can mean the topmost part of something. It can also mean a gathering place. And given that we're talking about getting the mind into a home as it's getting into concentration, that last one seems to be the best translation. Because if you think of especially the analogies that the Buddha gives for jhana, they're never one point. It's always whole body, whole body, whole body. So you're gathering the mind around your sensation of the body and your awareness right here. As I said earlier, it's an issue of getting your awareness to fill the body, getting a sense of ease and well-being to fill the body, and so they're all there together at the same time. So everything is gathered here. If you're going to be talking to yourself about anything, this is the topic you're talking about. If you're going to be aware of something, this is what you're aware of. Everything gathers around here. The word is actually used in an everyday way. When the Buddha says, when you're listening to a Dharma talk, you should be, as he says, don't look down on the Dharma, don't look down on the speaker, don't look down on yourself. And then apply appropriate attention and have your mind in a state of ekaga, which means one, gather together around the talk. So while you're listening here, don't look down on me. Don't look down on your own ability to be able to practice this. Don't look down on the Dharma. And gather your mind so that you're really listening to what is being said in the talk. Sometimes you hear that saying that, well, if your mind is one-pointed, it cannot hear anything and it cannot be aware of your body. But here the Buddha actually uses the word. You actually have to be able to think and you actually have to be able to hear in order to hear the Dharma talk. So it's a state of the mind being gathered around one topic. When the Buddha talks about the 4 jhanas, we've got a passage in here. Let's see which one it is. Okay, passage number 9, page 3. Okay, the description of the first jhana. You enter and remain in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure, born of seclusion. Seclusion here means that you have secluded your thoughts from sensuality. You're not thinking about the pizza down the road. You're not thinking about the chocolate. It does not mean being secluded from sensual pleasure, because if you were secluded from sensual pleasure, we'd have to throw you in prison. In other words, you can sit in a pleasant place and get into jhana, okay? Okay, so you simply that your thoughts are not going for sensual issues. Accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. Okay, you're talking to yourself about the breath and evaluating the breath. Then it goes on, you permeate and pervade, suffuse and fill this very body with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Just as if a dexterous bathman or bathman's apprentice would pour bath powder into a brass basin and knead it together, sprinkling it again and again with water, so that his ball of bath powder, saturated, moisture-laden, permeated within and without, would nevertheless not drip. Even so, you permeate this very body with a rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. There is nothing of your entire body unpervaded by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Okay, that's the description, that's the analogy for the first jhana. So in the first jhana, you're thinking about the breath, evaluating it, and there's a sense of pleasure, there's a sense of rapture that comes from that. When you get into the second jhana, you're going to drop the directed thought and evaluation. You're just going to be with the sensation of the breath. As I said earlier, this comes when you realize, okay, I can adjust, this is as far as I can adjust it, let's just be with it, maintain it. And there's a sense of pleasure, there's a sense of rapture that goes with that. When you get to the third jhana, the sense of rapture becomes kind of gross. You say, I want something more refined than this, more still, more calm. And that energy that's kind of suffusing to the body, you basically tune into a more refined level of energy in the body that's not so woo-wab, as they would say in Thai. And then as you stay there, things get calmer and calmer and calmer, until finally you realize your breath has stopped. That's when you enter the fourth jhana. And at that point, the pleasure's gone, but it's replaced by an equanimity. It's a pleasant equanimity. It's not dull, but there's the subtle pleasure in it, but it's very equanimous and very still. And this sense of your awareness fills the whole body. Mindfulness fills the whole body. In the second jhana, the analogy, look down in that second paragraph, just like a lake with spring water welling up from within, having no inflow from the east, west, north, or south, with the skies supplying abundant showers time and again, so the cool fount of water welling up from within the lake would permeate and pervade, suffuse and fill the lake with cool waters, there being no part of the lake unpervaded by the cool waters. So in this case, the conscious agent, which was the bathman, is no longer there, but there's still movement. In all of these analogies, water represents pleasure. Movement represents rapture. In the analogy for the third jhana, just like as in a lotus pond, some of the lotuses born and growing up in the water stay immersed in the water and flourish without standing up out of the water. So they permeated and pervaded, suffused and filled with the cool water from their roots to their tips. With nothing of those lotuses would be unpervaded with the cool water. So here you still have water in the analogy, but it's still. It just saturates the lotuses and they're all very still together. Finally, in the fourth jhana, the analogy is of the person, just as if a man were sitting covered from head to foot with a white cloth, so there would be no part of his body to which the white cloth did not extend. Even so, you sit permeating the body with a pure, bright awareness, with nothing of your entire body unpervaded by pure, bright awareness. It's at this state, by the way, that the fourth jhana is purity of equanimity and mindfulness. This is where mindfulness actually becomes pure. The Buddha never separates mindfulness practice from concentration practice. In fact, his description of right mindfulness is how you get the mind into concentration. And for those descriptions of the 4 jhanas just basically are describing these are the levels of concentration that you go into if you're practicing right mindfulness in the right way. So at this state, the pleasure's gone, but there's still a state of well-being that is equanimous. And your mind is filled with that, your body is filled with this sense of being totally aware. Everything is very still. So those are the 4 levels of concentration you get into. Those instructions I was giving at the beginning of the day, working with the breath energy, that's basically trying to get you into the first jhana. Working through the tensions in the body, the blockages in the body, so there can be a sense of the breath energy flowing together. And then trying to get you, at that last step, just fill the body with your awareness, let the breath do its thing. You don't have to think about the breath anymore. That's trying to get you into the second jhana. And then from there, the ability to maintain that will go through stages. The second and the third and the fourth. Any questions about that? Yes?
So, sounds like you think everybody can get into these 4 jhanas. Everybody who is practicing diligently.
You should be able to, yeah. I mean, I was struck by how many of my teacher's students, people living in Bangkok, could do this.
I mean, I've heard, like, it's really difficult, you have to sit very long retreat, and some people never get there.
Try my instructions.
This is like out of reach.
No, it's something that people do, Because what is the Buddha asking you to focus on? You're focusing on your breath. How close can it be to you, And just learn how to say, I'm just going to get really interested in the breath. This is why I personally found the Ajaan Lee method worked for me, and while a lot of other methods did not work. But getting in touch with the breath energies in the body I found intriguing. As a little kid, I was always not really with my body that much. And so here was a way of getting back in touch with my body. And realizing, these energies are flowing around. And they're not something esoteric. There's something, the way you feel your body is the breath energy. Now the question is, how do you want to relate to that? And for some of us have more trouble relating to it than others. As soon as you start focusing on it, it starts doing weird things. But you have to realize, okay, even the weird things are things that you can get past. And like I said, if it feels like there's a tightness in your chest, think of it going out your arms, out the palms of your hands. If you're feeling like there's this oppressive pressure in your head, think of it going out your eyes. In other words, don't hold it in. Think of it being kind of more porous. And then gradually things settle down, settle down, settle down. I mean, it is important that you do this every day. Make this a daily practice. And I often found that it's good to give the early morning part of the day over to this. So you're not saying, gosh, I've just got to clean out the garbage from the day before I can even settle down. Try doing this before the garbage has come. And then try to think of somehow that, okay, when the garbage comes at you, you're not going to hold it with you. I mean, the same tendency that wants to hold in the breath energies is the same one that will hold into the issues of the day. And say, that just can go past, go past, go past. I don't have to gather that up. So there's a certain amount of discernment that has to be applied here, so that you're not gathering stuff up in the course of the day and then having to sort it out as you sit down and meditate. The discernment that allows you to see through when something comes at you, it's not coming at me, it's going to go past. And that way, then you can try to maintain this sense of, and this is why it's good to, this is when you're doing walking meditation, try to maintain the sense of the breath energy in the body, because then you can take that into your work, into your family life. The other people in the family can be hysterical, but I'm here with my breath, I'm very calm, I don't have to pick up their hysteria. And then when you sit down, you're not carrying all this stuff around. Yes?
Would you say that mindfulness becomes sort of self-sustaining in these states, like with the shift from needing to focus on it to just kind of being in it, I guess you could say?
Mm-hmm. It'll be self-sustaining for a while, but you still have to nurture the causes for it, because otherwise it can begin to sort of unravel. Yes?
Sounds like you're saying that the difference between the first and the second is in the second you're not even, it just sort of clicks in.
You're not evaluating things anymore, you're not doing any of the adjusting. You're saying, okay, the breath is right there, and then you're just going to go into it. It's almost as if with the first jhana, you're here and the breath is there, and you're kind of hovering around, making sure everything is okay. And in the second, you go in. You're there. You get the sense that the awareness is one with the breath. They call it unification of awareness in the Pali. And I think that's what they're getting at. Your awareness and the breath feel to be one thing. You're right there. You have a question?
Yeah, I think, especially sometimes when working with concentration and trying to deepen the states of concentration, I find that sometimes it's helpful to develop the perception of it being counterintuitive, in the sense that, like as you say, sometimes if you have a pain in one place in the body, to go someplace else. And for me, like that's so counterintuitive not to hold on to that pain. Try not only to move it somewhere else, but the strength of it wanting to move back is, to kind of try and work with it gently, but with as much force to kind of hold it where I'm trying to hold it. And just kind of thinking, like, is that a characteristic of my own mind at this moment, or, is that just simply the characteristic of minds that aren't free?
Pain is riveting for everybody. And just say, I learned how to undo this. You're going to be learning new habits in how you relate to your body. This is what this is all about. And some people who've had lots of issues they'll take a while to settle down. I've noticed with my teacher when he was teaching people in Bangkok that it was like, in the beginning, it was like herding cats. People were coming from lots of different directions with lots of different problems, and just to get them to that point where finally the breath stops. It was very different for everybody else, for different people. Once they got to that step, where they could be there very, very still, then the next steps were just the same for everybody. But we're all coming from a different direction trying to get to the center, which means some of us are to the north, some of us are to the south. Some of us are flying around up here, some of them down here. Okay, we're trying to come into that stage where we can be okay just being with the body. And it feels settled and it feels good. So know that it's going to be slightly different for different people as they settle in. But a lot of it will be, as you say, counterintuitive, because you've been dealing with this breath energy in your body without even thinking about sometimes there being breath energies at all. It's just how your body feels. And a pain comes up, we've got to push it away. Or some energy comes up, I've been scared, I got to stamp it down, And then you have to unlearn those habits.
And would you say then, is that gathering place, is that first jhana, or is that access concentration, or what's...
Well, when you're gathered and there's no breath moving, that's the only kind of objective step where you know where you are, and that's actually the fourth jhana.
So the energy's...
Energy is fine. Now to get there, as I said, will take... And I've noticed that some people have actually found that they have 5 steps before they get there. Other people have 3, at least that they're conscious of. And so it's a matter of each person working out within themselves. When my mind settles down, how many steps does it go through? And you know for sure where you are. And finally, when you get to that point where I'm just sitting, I'm not even breathing, but I'm okay. Which is why when you're doing the meditation and you're thinking about where I am in concentration practice, just put Post-it notes on it. And then when you finally get there, then you can rearrange the Post-it notes. I don't know how many people come to the monastery. Well, I was on my last retreat and I got into the 3rd jhana, and I just don't even listen. I'm sorry. I just like say wherever you were, just try to go back there, and we'll talk about it. As you work with it.
hypnotic states too, where you can think you're in a jhana and you're actually in some kind of self-hypnosis.
Yeah, which is why working with the breath is a good way of doing with it. Because when you get into this hypnotic state, the breath starts feeling kind of weird. You see, as long as the breath feels comfortable, it feels at ease, feels fine. Okay, I know I'm on it. And I get kind of like this little thing, calm down. Because there's a part of the mind that wants to go into the hypnotic state, the one that just, I just don't want to think at all, please just keep me away from thinking. That's not healthy. Say, okay, what would feel good in the body? Think of this as an exploration of the energies in the body and what feels natural, what feels nourishing. And you're much less likely to go off. I mean, of all the forms of meditation, breath meditation is the safest. And what usually happens when people get kind of weird is they've dropped the breath and they've gone into something else. And so just keep coming back to the breath as your touchstone.
Is there a general time frame for how long each jhana would last?
When you get really good at it, you can just stay in there for long periods of time.
Could one last 30 seconds?
It's not worth much. I mean, sometimes you find that when you get into one of these states, you say, I know I've been here before, but it was only very briefly. Because what makes this worthwhile doing is that you want to get that mind state steady enough so you can watch it and observe it. So 30 seconds is kind of like a little hit, but that's all. Whereas you can stay there for, if you stay there for an hour, then you can really observe it. I was hearing of one jhana teacher was saying that each jhana should last about 7 minutes because beyond that it gets uncomfortable. I'm sorry, no. That's not how it works. If it's uncomfortable, it's not jhana, I'm sorry. That's the state of just, imposing a perception on the mind, trying to trap it in that perception. Because it should have a sense, okay, everything is open, feels good, feels very balanced. I mean, we're talking about a home for the mind. That's one of the Pali terms for it, Vihara Dhamma. You feel at home here. It's a state where you can say, okay, I could stay here for a long time and would not feel out of balance or that would be unnatural. Anything else? Okay, it's 4:00. Thank you for your attention. And we meet what time tomorrow? 10 o'clock, okay.
Do you have any retreats coming up or any other teachings up north or anything? Down in San Diego?
I'll be in Bellingham next September. I'll be teaching in Barrie the end of April. Barrie, Massachusetts. And I'm teaching all the time down at the monastery. San Diego is not that far away. Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be actually at the monastery for...
I'll be there until the 25th of November. And then I'll be back at the end of December and to the beginning of February. So, okay, thank you.